Hello, Michael Lombardo here. Welcome to Awaken Podcast. We have a new show every Monday releasing on charismapodcastnetwork.com. If you're not aware, there is releases on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Audible, YouTube now. And so if you go to YouTube, Michael Lombardo, Awaken Podcast, there is tons of video content there for free as well for you to access. Lots of great interviews, teaching series that I've done. And so make sure to tap into that. And so I've got a great guest on the show. I want to make sure we have enough time to have that conversation. But if you are new to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a blessing. I believe we're at episode 216 now. And so the Lord has done some awesome things, got some great feedback. Just recently did an interview with James Gall, and there was such a sweet presence of the Lord and strong prophetic unction on that show. And it was just so great to speak to him, especially a father in the faith that has ministered for years and years in the prophetic. And so it's always great to have him on. And so there's a lot of great things coming towards the end of this year and beginning of next year. And so thank you so much, even to those who are always watching, always listening week after week. And those who are sharing this, subscribing, rating, reviewing, all of that helps us get this out to more and more people so they can be blessed, challenged, and strengthened by the gospel of Jesus. If you're new to the show is called Awaken Podcast. Ephesians 5:14, awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead and Christ will shine on you. The Apostle Paul was speaking to believers, not unbelievers, in the book of Ephesians. And so the Lord is awakening our hearts to the beauty of who he is, the glory of what he did through Jesus Christ, who we are now in Christ, the access we have to him, that we could walk with him, talk with him, we could flow in his spirit, and that we have a mandate in the earth. But we do that first as priests that know him intimately, and then as kings that walk it out in our everyday lives and have dominion in the world. And so that is the passion of my heart behind this show. And I love having amazing people from around the world that are his children, that are that are laboring in his harvest field, and have him in and to share their heart as well. And so no further ado, I have Taylor Armstrong on the show with me. He is a musician. He is a songwriter. He is a worshiper. You can find his music on Spotify. I think it just popped up on my phone on Spotify because I listen to a lot of John Mark Pantana, Jonathan Ogden. These guys have come on the show in the past. If you want to listen to those, you can tap in to previous episodes. His song Tender popped up on my Spotify and it wrecked me. And so I was like, I got to listen to more of this guy. So I started to tap in. And honestly, at the end of last year in November, went through some hard stuff. The Lord really reignited my heart in a lot of ways. And Taylor Armstrong has been blasting for the past since November, going on a year now on my playlist, and it's been beautiful. And so it's an honor to have him on the show. Taylor, thanks for joining me.
Of course, yeah, glad to help in that way. So
yeah, man, absolutely. And so I actually made a playlist called Taylor Armstrong and some other stuff. I had some other songs on there, and I've shared it with a couple dozen people. Like, hey, this is some intimate stuff. You gotta just boom, and I just sent it to people. And so,
thanks for telling me that. Yeah, it makes me feel good.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And so, yeah, I know we'll be talking about maybe some future stuff that you're doing. I'm always looking forward to when it pops up on my phone that you release some new music, but. Tell us a little bit about yourself, man. I know that I'd like to hear about your journey a little bit before I ask you some questions about some of your songs. And, there's something very deep and intimate about your music. And so I'd love to kind of just hear your heart and more about you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the lovely introduction and just for reaching out and having me on. Mm-hmm. Just to hop right into it. My name's Taylor Armstrong. I'm living in Southern California right now, but I'm not from here. I'm from rural, isolated areas on the northeast. I'm actually Canadian. I was born in a city. It's called St. John in New Brunswick, Canada. Probably Probably haven't heard of that place. It's about, yeah, it's cold up there. The town I lived in was outside of that city. It had about 1,000 people.
Wow.
And then when I was 7, I moved to Maine, northern Maine, grew up there, and graduated to a town of 5,000 people. Uh, yeah, so I mean, I grew up in the trees and near the water and country living type situations.
Yeah.
I always kind of dreamed of being on the West Coast or being in the cities. And yeah, so found my way out here somehow. But yeah. So I mean, my journey. It's hard to not talk about the trials and the when I think about my story. When I think it's hard for me to not. I have to address the amount of adversities over the years. Kind of led me to this place. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff as well, but I'm 31 now, and can not everybody is so familiar to loss or grief. And it's I think I'm realizing that more and more as I move forward in this whole walk and journey of life. So, yeah, I'd love to talk about that stuff, talk about my music. But for music, we can get into that. But for music, yeah, I started releasing music probably 6 years ago. 2016, I released my first little worship album. It was called First Love. I recorded that in Canada. I was working. I just got out of YWAM, so I did a couple of ministry schools. I did Youth with a Mission for about 2 years. I was in Herrenhut, Germany. So if you know anything about that place, it's rich in revival history.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Moravians came out of there, and I didn't know that going in there at the time. I think I just went there because they had a they had an art DTS discipleship training school for YWAM. They had an art one, and I went there and just felt called to go there, and it really changed my life because I had just come out of about a 2 to 3 year stint of just sex, drugs, rock and roll, all that stuff, and going there really changed my life in a lot of positive ways. And but I had just returned from YWAM, and I'm talking about my when I made my first album. First, I was working at a worship and prayer house, so it's pretty crazy. I was working from like 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. in the morning, like 4 or 5 days a week. Yeah, just worshiping and writing songs. Like most of the time, no one would even come into the barn or whatever, because it was in a barn. It was held in the barn. Yeah, and it would just be me there. I'd watch the sun come up, and I'd just be playing my guitar. Like I was getting paid for it. I think it was quite a gig. I don't think I could ever do it again, to be honest. It was such hard work. Yeah, I put about 2,000 hours in a year just worshiping. Yeah. I really think about that time when if it wasn't for that time, I don't think I would have discovered my sound, I guess, or I don't think I would have cultivated what I needed, basically, for my music. Yeah. So I'm grateful for that time. Yeah. So that's out of that season. That's where kind of my music started growing, because I started hearing about Jonathan Ogden. I know you mentioned him, Rivers and Robots, and I started to hear about some of these other independent artists that I more related to. I did like the more CCM corporate worship stuff as well, but I think I gravitated more toward like the independent artists and the artists that kind of had a different sound. Maybe you wouldn't sing their songs on a Sunday, but you'd listen to it in a car or something, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So I released my music, and then I went to ministry school, another ministry school in Reading. At a church called Bethel. Did their ministry school. I was there for 3 years, and while I was there, that's kind of when my music started picking up, and I started working with producers and from Reading, and I went there because I wanted to grow and believe in myself, and I would say I really got that. That's a great environment. For that, there's a lot of really big people there, big people in the faith, and just anyway, so that's kind of when I started connecting with Jonathan Ogden and a lot of other artists. We started connecting online, so using social media, and one thing led to another, and we ended up doing a tour together, and kind of everyone kind of came under each other's umbrellas, and we all grew together, and all of us kind of found our footing and found our way, and it's just really cool to see everything that happened there. So
that's awesome, man. That's awesome. And first of all, I love the Moravians. I just read a book on the Moravians, and so that's awesome. I got a lot of people I know from YWAM, and we love Bethel Supernatural School of Ministry. Met my wife in Harvest School in Mozambique, and so I know if you went to Bethel, I know you know a lot of Irish people, a strong connection with that. And so, but it's beautiful how God brings people together, makes the connections that are needed for to get his message out, to work together. We need each other in the body. And so it's beautiful how you get plugged into a community, and then you meet specific people. You're able to serve, bless them. They're able to serve, bless you. You build these deep relationships with people, and then you move forward in the kingdom together. And so I love how you spoke about, well, obviously it's hard when we go through trials, grief, different things like that. But I really feel like when I listen to your songs, I feel like there is a vulnerability, there is an honesty in terms of the hard things that take place in life, but there is also such a glimpse into an intimate life of clinging to Jesus, a life of surrender, of knowing him personally. And I believe that really comes from going through hard times, really honestly, just him being our everything in certain seasons, and then experiencing him in those moments of just clinging to him, laying down at his feet, just drawing near to him. You have encounters with God that are so beautiful, special, and intimate that really set your heart on fire, keep your heart on fire. When I hear a song like Light as a Feather, that was one of my favorites for a little while. And then, the one verse in another song on that album that says, purify my heart that I may fall in love again. That just rings and rings in my spirit. And your song Tender is so intimate. That's a song that's got 2.5 million listens on Spotify. But were there specific, we can kind of dive into that a little bit. Were there specific moments in your life where maybe you had to cling to him through hardship, like you mentioned, where you got this glimpse of the Lord that made you fall more and more in love with him? Because that really shines through your music, and that really resonates with me.
Yeah, thank you. Just a side note, and then I'll circle back. Yeah, music for me through all of life's ups and downs has just become a journal type of thing for me. It does bring healing, and I'm just singing out new songs for me.
Yeah.
I can get lost into it, kind of like when I worked at that prayer house, worship house. It was like 6 hours passes, that happens still now at times, where I start a song and it's so relevant to me. I know I'm expressing something, and simply in my expression in that new song, God is just like, meeting with me. It's my way to worship, and there does bring healing in a lot of ways. And I love it when it connects with other people as well. it doesn't happen every time. And I'm just really grateful for music and what it's been for me in my life. But yeah, I think that's kind of, there's one more thing. That's kind of my goal when I write music and when I share it. I want to be genuine. I want to be authentic and vulnerable with my music. I understand it's not always going to be like that. I write for the church as well, like on Sundays. Like I'm hired at a church to be a songwriter and a producer for the church, and it's a little. I'm not saying it's totally. You can't be authentic. You can't be genuine and stuff. But sometimes it's just a little different when you're writing corporate church. So I'm grateful that I get to have the outlet for myself as well, just to sing. But I'm also grateful for serving in the local church. But awesome. Yeah. So just to talk about Tender, there's a story I love to share about Tender, where I know you brought it up a couple times, and it's one of my favorite songs as well. Even just last night I was at church. I led worship yesterday, and someone came up to me and was just like, "Hey, like, I love your Taylor Armstrong." I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I love your song Tender." Like that's the song that kind of, I got it tattooed on my neck. It's sort of the song. Anyway, so I I wrote that song in 2018, and there's a story I love to share about where the song came from. I was in ministry school at the time, up in Reading, and I'd been there for a year, so I was going on my second year there, and I noticed for about 4 or 5 days, and I still am unraveling this, and it's been 4 years. I'm still processing at times what the heck even happened, but I was quite emotional for a few days, where I would just start crying and tearing up, and naturally I went and asked myself, like, what is wrong? Like, what's going on? Like, like, am I lonely? Am I depressed? Like, am I sad? Like, why am I crying? Naturally that's what I thought there was something wrong with it at the time. And one day I came home from school, and I had been in that space. And if you've ever been to a ministry school, if you've ever been to Bethel or anything, it's, especially in the school, it's like 4 or 5 days straight of just hyper focused worship and prayer and intercession and all the above, and that's all great. It's just like, it's an intense environment to be in. So it does, looking back on it now, it makes sense, that I was intensely emotional at the time, and just close to God. And anyway, so I had come home. It was a pretty intense day at school, just in the spirit. We're worshiping a lot and all that good stuff, and came home and just kind of could not really get out of that headspace, and the tears started welling up, and that's when I started to say, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Why am I so emotional? Why? It seems like everybody else is okay. What's going on? And I'm next thing you know, I'm in tears. I'm bawling. I'm in a ball on my bed, just crying. And I felt in that moment the Father's love in a way that really marked my life and changed my life. I mean, I wrote that song about it, and so I didn't audibly hear anything, but I just like really got this image, and like just in my mind, I just knew, like, in my whole being just knew that I was being held all I could think about was like a baby in a father's arm.
Yeah.
And I just, that question, what is wrong with me, was answered like nothing. There's nothing wrong with you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And I just was like, okay, like I felt so held and safe, and I didn't stop crying. I cried harder. It was like, that's what changed me, was that I could sit there in the Father's arms crying because he's safe. He's the safest place to just weep, the safest place to just be held.
Yeah.
And 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 to know that it's not because there's something wrong with you, but it's because, and this is what I felt for myself, is like, no, like I'm just safe, and you're a child in my arms, needing to be held, and there's nothing more to it. And I think what I took from it was like, oh, I'm being changed. Like my heart's being transformed. I'm being softened. I'm becoming tender. And that's kind of where in that moment, like it was a gift. I picked up my guitar right there in that moment from those tears. And I literally, just the first thing I played was the chorus to the song, you're making me so tender. Never felt so safe with any other. I sang it, and God, I love when that happens. When I just am gifted with new choruses or anyway, that was one of those situations. And it really changed my life. And I constantly come back to that and remind myself to stay tender, even, 4 years later, in situations. And but that's kind of, that's where that song was written. And then I wrote the rest of the song just out of the idea of vulnerability and being fully seen in front of the Lord, like just as you are, and how uncomfortable that can be, because I was so uncomfortable. Like I kept saying like, oh, like what's going on? I was wrestling, this is uncomfortable. What is going on? What is going on? And anyway, that's kind of the rest of the song. It can be uncomfortable to be vulnerable with people, with God, but ultimately it brings us close.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful thing about his love. When you are experiencing the Father's love and his nearness is so intense, you know that his nature is good and that he is for you and that he is affectionate and that there's loving kindness towards you. And then it becomes easier and easier in that revelation, in that place of receiving his love, to be vulnerable and to open yourself up, because you know that you are in the safest place. Just like you said, to be yourself, and that he sees you through the eyes of love, not through the eyes of condemnation, not through the lens of the law, but he sees you through the finished work of his son, and he sees you pure, whether you feel pure or not. He sees you, unblemished and without spot, whether you feel that way or not, and you know you can be fully yourself, weakness and all. And that is just the most glorious thing. And so I went through a season where Lord unwrapped Song of Songs to me, and I was breaking in the Song of Songs, and I didn't get it at first, but I felt drawn to the book. And then I began to get this revelation of his affection. And I remember just laying on my bed for hours and hours, laughing, crying. Like my friends thought I was crazy, but I was just so undone by his passion for me. I went from, I believe in hungering for God, seeking God, pursuing God. I'm not throwing away that language, but in that season, I went from like really focusing on my participation or what I had to do in my relationship with God, to realizing, no, he first hungered for me. He's pursuing me daily. He's seeking my heart out on a daily basis. Like it's his affection towards me that actually motivates and empowers my seeking of him, my walking with him, my desire to obey him. And so anyways, man, I get it. It resonates, and it really comes through in your music. And even that word tender, I feel like, and you could tell me something else about it, but not just the song tender, but that word is used in several other songs of yours. And so I feel like that is like very important to you. It's like that word means a lot to who you are as a person. And I've heard it probably in 3 or 4 songs. I'm like, oh man, tender must really mean something to him. Just that place of just staying tender in the Lord's love.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think, like I said a minute ago, it's almost more of a reminder for myself, and a reminder for others as well. So
Yeah.
I just keep throwing it in there almost for fun. I've I've found a lot of freedom over this last year in my music and my expression. Just taking all the pressure off, and you can probably see it in a lot of my titles of my songs and stuff. It's just like sometimes I just make up like random things, and but there's something so beautiful in it. And just I used to put a lot of pressure, a lot of, and it was almost robbing of the joys of creativity for me. And with my lately a lot of my music, it's just like whatever I want to sing is just, I'll sing it, I'll hit record, and I'll share it,
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
and yeah, so I think for me, I'm rediscovering freedom and fun with
Come on, man.
music. And so sometimes I just throw in the words, throw in tender and all that. But to be honest, it's a special concept for me, and special. It's a theme, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, yeah,
That's a
yeah. So
cool transition actually, because one of my favorite albums is one of your shortest albums, and it's called Those Little God Songs. I posted on IG. And I spoke to my brother-in-law about it, who's a worshiper. He's newly saved, about 8 months saved, but he's such a talented musician. The guy plays the saxophone, the piano, the guitar. The guy, like, he writes music. He's just like anything he puts his hand to, he's just good at. And so, but he was just like, yeah, because especially the titles of the album, the titles of the songs on this album, he was just like, I feel like he's just probably saying, no pressure, man. Like, I don't need to, it doesn't need to be polished, doesn't need to be fancy. Like, this is in my heart and I'm releasing it. And that was his perspective on the titles and how you put the songs together. And you kind of just said that a minute ago, so it's spot on. But for me, it's like this album is 13 minutes and 8 seconds, and it's a powerful punch, dude. Like, I listened to it and it's like over, and I'm like, man, I guess I gotta play it again. Like, it leaves, and I don't know if that was even in your mind. Like, man, it's comes from my heart, and I'm gonna leave people wanting, because at the end of it, honestly, I think like I want more out of some songs. Like, but that's almost something really beautiful about it too. At the same time, that there's no pressure to put together, sing the chorus 4 times, come up with the bridge, come up with 2 verses. Like, there's no pressure. It's just something that organically came up out of your heart. You recorded it and released it.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Actually, I play the saxophone as well.
Do you?
That's
Cool.
the instrument I learned how to play. Started when I was 9, and I always wanted to stop playing, but my mom wouldn't let me quit. So like we spent $1,000 on the saxophone, like yeah. So
That was the first instrument he learned too, and he's a professional sax player. Like, he rips it, but like the Lord in this season, he's like teaching him how to be humble about it. But like he plays it at upper room set, and they want him to play the sax. But he almost like the Lord's teaching him how to like be humble, because in the world he played the saxophone and like ripped it, and it was all about him. And God's teaching him how to keep his heart tender and not for it not to be a show. And like he's just, but anyway, God's doing some great things in his heart. But he plays at upper room. But he started with the sax, and then all the other instruments came out of it.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a beautiful instrument. I'm thankful now that my mom never let me quit, and I got to start whipping it back out in my song. But yeah, no, it's funny. Even upper room, I guess. Like, someone sent me a video, and they were pre-service, like playing. I was thinking about this last night. They were playing some of the songs off that little 13-minute album that I made.
Yeah? Okay.
The Purify My Heart part is, this random person on Instagram was like, "Look, my church, Upper Room Dallas, is playing your song." And then last night at my church, they were playing another one off that song, and I get messages all the time, people playing that little 13-minute album at their church.
Hey man, you do what you feel led to do, but you might need to throw in the Purify My Heart to Make Me Fall in Love with You into a bigger song. I don't know. That's just my desire. You could do with it what you want, but there's just so much punch and like
Yeah.
oil on that.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad you said that. I've actually thought that many times. I just did a live worship record with a community out of Lubbock called the community is called Blue Jay
Yeah, I've
House.
heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a great group. The guy kind of visionary guy with that is a dear friend of mine, and I met him in Reading, and quite a few of the people in the communities from out of Reading as well, who've all kind of gone on and done their own things. But
Mm-hmm.
we just wrote a bunch of songs, and I so I had that on the back of my mind and
Come on.
turning that into songs. But and again, that's another really cool outlet that I have to potentially just to pour into the local church in that type of
Yeah.
setting as well.
Come on.
Anyway, yeah. So your brother was right. I think I kind of got into a place in my life where I felt pretty discouraged with the strategizing. I'll just talk about the industry real quick.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
In the career and the business side of it, it just I felt just a little bit discouraged, and I didn't want just with the Instagram, the marketing myself, and the strategizing and the planning and like for the song release, normally it's like, okay, well, you do 7 songs because it's an album, and then you make your songs, you get them produced professionally, and then you market for the release, and it takes several months. And
Yeah.
I was in a place in my life. I haven't really talked about this openly too much publicly, but I had just gone through a breakup with someone that I was really in love with, and we were basically engaged, and that ended very quickly, very suddenly, and it sent me into a season where I was needing. I didn't pick up my guitar for probably 4 or 5 months just to grieve and process in other ways through counseling and in the local church and all that other stuff. But then when I was ready, I started to pick up my guitar, and those are the songs that kind of came out of that. It was almost a reconnection with myself as well, and with my soul and with God, and in my own individual way. And so a lot of I wasn't in a headspace where I even like wanted to be posting on social media, because I was heartbroken. And so it was it was just kind of this time where I needed to just reconnect with God and myself in a way that had no pressure. But I did make these little videos and posted them on Instagram, but in a way that just was more. It was just pure. It wasn't to market myself or get likes or get views or anything like that. And so for about 2 weeks straight, I would make these little songs every day, and again, just without pressure, just having fun in there, just because it was me getting back on my feet again as well. And sharing those videos, they did really well naturally. I think people sensed that they were just real and authentic little piece. And especially after the last couple years, just on a global scale, I think all of us were and are just craving authenticity, and I think the timing of it was just kind of right. Timing is so important, so huge. I've noticed with this whole music thing, and anyway, I just naturally through sharing those, I think I noticed that they were getting a lot of traction, and they were being shared, and people were really connecting with it. So I was just like, well, here you go. And that I didn't title them any differently than I did on Instagram. I actually turned around and released it, like, I think it was 2 weeks later or a week later, which is, you don't do that because of, you want most people with um, labels or distribution help, and that takes a long time, and contracts, and then with it's for playlisting as well, and you usually give it a lot of time. So I just threw it out there, and somehow they were all getting playlisted, and it was so against the grain, but they were still having success, and yeah. So I'll say this: we're talking a lot about authenticity, a lot about vulnerability, and just being genuine and all that, and that's great. But my friend of mine said to me, he's like, it was done in a really, really beautiful way. I got what he was saying. I understood it. It really resonated with me. It convicted me in a really beautiful way. He said, he's like, we're called to worship in spirit and truth. And he's like, because it was actually the Blue Jay guys. We were talking a lot about the new songs and stuff, and the heart of spirit and truth. And anyway, we were prepping for that album, and he mentioned to me, it's like, I think you got the spirit thing down. You got the vulnerability down. You got the emotions down, the genuinity. Is that right? Genuinity?
Yeah, I believe so. If it's not, we'll just roll with it. It's good.
Cool. And he's just like, I would love to see you lead in truth more too. And I was just like, man, I just got what he was saying. And I wrote another little song called I'm Remembering. And the lyrics are just like, I remind myself I'm blessed. I'm blessed. And the whole kind of theme of the song was the truth side of it. It's great to sing and express yourself. And sometimes we also, as David did, build ourselves up and Lord, encourage ourselves, and sometimes we have to do that. I'm going through it right now. Even just with my family and dealing with a heavy loss. There's something about saying thank you in those situations, and saying, God, you are faithful, and I love you, God.
Yeah.
Rather than you can say it too, like, man, this life is heavy, this is tough, but also there's just something beautiful about saying that as well.
Oh no, I've been stuck in the Psalms, and I don't mean you use the word stuck in a negative way. What I mean is just the beauty of King David and how he expressed his emotions of, God, everyone around me is prospering. God, my enemies surround me. God, what's going on here? I feel defeated. Into, you are my rock, you are my refuge, you are my stronghold, you are my shelter, the one in whom I trust. I will see the goodness of God in the land of the living, and all these different powerful revelations that he shared. And so anyways, that's awesome, man. I love that. And so, hey, before we close out this podcast, man, what would you want to give those who are listening right now? Obviously they could tap into your stuff on Spotify, everything's there. But is there anything around the corner on the horizon that you'd like to say, hey, this is coming up soon, or anything else you'd want to share about what you do and where you go, and just give us a little bit of that?
Yeah. So I haven't been doing too much traveling with music this past year. But I've been releasing a lot of music, and you can find me on YouTube and Apple Music and Spotify, and wherever you listen to music, you'll find my stuff there. Again, it's Taylor Armstrong. I'm always throwing out songs randomly, but you can't expect next year from January on, I'm going to be releasing a series of songs from a studio album that I made about a year ago. It's more of a singer-songwriter, storyteller album. Very, very different than what you've heard from me so far. I actually recorded this up in Portland. There's a church called Door of Hope up there. Josh White was kind of leading that, and I think Josh Garrels was a worship pastor there for a while, and just great, really great community. Anyway, so they have a little label called Deeper Well, and they flew me up, and we did a record, and so they have a sound, and it's a lot of folk music and stuff like that. So I created this special little album, but I'm gonna get that out in the world, but meanwhile, I am working at home just on some new bedroom worship songs, that type of thing, what you can expect from me. So that's about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, hopefully next year I get to do some more traveling and sharing songs as well. So
come on, man, that'd be awesome. And so, can people just follow you on Instagram to kind of find out that stuff, or is there a certain spot where they can figure out where you're touring at?
Yeah. Social media is great. Instagram's great. Just Taylor, the letter C, Armstrong. It's my middle names that's what the C stands for.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to that. For those who are watching and listening right now, and I'll just say this before we close, Taylor. I know I said it a little bit in the beginning of the podcast, but I highly recommend, and I'm not just saying this because he's on the show. The reason why I got Taylor on the show is because his music, his worship has been, the Lord has used it mightily in the past year or so in my life. And so I truly believe that if you tap into it, there's a sweet presence of God. There is a vulnerability that draws you in, and an expression that will really bless your secret place with God. And I really know that you'll find something in that mix of songs that will really speak to you in this season. And so I highly recommend it. Tap into it. Taylor Armstrong on Spotify, Apple Music, all those different platforms. And thank you again, Taylor, bro. Bless you, man. I know it's good you release stuff. You know it's touching people, but at the same time, bro, thank you so much for you stewarding what God's given you.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Awesome. For those who are watching and listening right now, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast so we can get it out to more people so they could be blessed, they could be strengthened, they could be awakened by the gospel of Jesus. Bless you, and I'll speak to you next time on Awaken Podcast.